Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Giordano, and today I'm joined by Canadian author, presenter, and traveler, Heather Lea. She's been to over 60 countries, 40 of which were on a BMW GS during a 2-year round-the-world motorcycle adventure. Welcome to the podcast, Heather. We're so glad that you've been able to make it for a chat.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yay! So you're a freelance writer. You've been a freelance writer for a long time, and you've written for Overland Journal, Expedition Portal, Canadian Geographic, and Gear Junkie. But the big news is that you've just released your first book called Riding Full Circle. So super excited for you, and congratulations.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to have it done. It's one of those things where it's kind of bittersweet because it's been such a part of my life for 8 years. Writing the book kept me on the trip that the book is about. And I'm also just so glad to be done with it because writing a book is harder than I thought and expensive and a toll on your time. So now it's the fun part where I get to talk to folks like yourself and I get to hear about people reading the book and what their thoughts are. So yeah, now is the fun part.
Yeah. And it sounds like Scott Brady's going to do a review of the book. So you'll see that in the spring 2026 Overland Journal magazine edition, which is very exciting.
That's awesome. I can't wait.
And a special thanks to Adrenaline Industries for their support of this week's podcast. Adrenaline is making some of the most exceptional expedition campers on the market, and they are made right here in the USA. Judd and his team of skilled craftsmen are building overland trucks based on heavy-duty American truck platforms, integrating comfortable composite living modules with high-clearance four-wheel drive. These trucks feature 43-inch tires, robust bumpers, winches, and a conversion to single rear wheels. For their expedition trucks, they are building on extreme-duty industrial four-wheel drives like the BAE with 4- or 6-wheel drive, reserve payload capacity, and third-world serviceability. All of this compatibility comes with one-on-one customer support and in-the-field training. Others take you far. Adrenaline Industries will take you further. Thanks again, Adrenaline Industries, for making this podcast possible.
Nice. So I would love to talk to you today about unfiltered realities of long-term travel. I kind of thought that was a fun umbrella term for a bunch of different topics that we could dive into based on this trip that you were on. And I think folks will get a bit of an insight into kind of what your book's going to be about, but then some other little things that maybe little nuggets in there of wisdom and things too. So if you could just give a brief overview of the trip and what it was and when you went and where, etc.
Sure. Yeah. So we started the trip in the fall of 2015, and we didn't come back until the fall of 2017. So it was a 2-year trip, and we basically started out with Dave, my riding partner for the trip, had a map on a wall in his room, and he said, you have a motorcycle. I don't have a motorcycle yet, but I'm going to get one. And then I think we should ride down to Patagonia. And I just immediately said yes. Like, I didn't even think about it. It's like, oh yeah, we're totally doing that. And then from there, it became this round the world trip because we were kind of like, well, we're going to be all the way down there. Why not keep going? I mean, we have to, get the bikes back somehow. So why not just keep going? And what a lot of people might not know or realize until they read the book is Dave and I only knew each other for less than a month when we decided to do this trip.
Wow.
So we had recently met online, and we lived in 2 different countries, and we met up and we were getting along well. And so that's how the trip kind of came to be, was just this total, like throwing all caution to the wind and just like, this guy has a cool idea. I don't even know him, but I really want to do this. So, and I also thought, if I have my own bike, I can just leave him in the dust if I don't like him.
Yeah, I was gonna
If I want
say
to,
that takes a lot of courage to
totally.
go with somebody you don't really know very well on an intense trip like that. But yeah, good point. You could just get on your bike and ride if you
Well,
need
and
to.
that's the biggest thing. I mean, I was late in life when I met Dave. I was almost 40. Well, actually, I think I had turned 40, and I was super independent. Like, I just, that was one of my the things that I really liked about myself and liked in my life. And so it wasn't so much that I was trying to be a jerk. That was just a natural thought process to me, was like, well, I can always just leave, I can, as long as I have my own wheels. So yeah, that became, that helped in the decision. But of course, my hopes were that we would get along and be able to continue the trip and get through it together, and then who knows what after that.
Yeah. So where did you go after you reached Patagonia?
Right. So we started in Revelstoke, British Columbia, and then we went all the way down to Ushuaia. So we went to Patagonia and then kept going just to reach the southernmost tip of the Americas. And then we didn't really plan too far ahead. So once we kind of thought, okay, we're going to get there and then reassess. The original plan, kind of loose plan in the back of our head, however, was to go from Ushuaia to Buenos Aires and then fly over to Africa. But there was a couple of things at play. I was having quite a bit of trouble with the bike that I had, and we kind of needed to figure out a way to get back home and get some repairs on the bike happening. And we also realized we wanted to do Alaska and Russia, and to do those both in one summer season is next to impossible. So we went all the way south, and instead of going over to Africa, we decided to then fly back to the US, and then we went all the way north. So we went up to Yukon, Alaska, and then that was year one. Pretty much just did the Americas all in year one, and then the plan from there was to again reassess after we had finished with Alaska. Neither of us was having a really good time in the heat. So the heat of Central America, for example, was proving to be really hard on us. So we kind of thought we would forget about Africa altogether. Yeah, there was just this kind of niggling. I mean, I've been to Africa. I'm sure you have too. It gets into you, into your skin and in your head. And while you're there, you hate it, but when you're not there, it just keeps calling to you somehow. So I thought, we just have to go to Africa. So yeah, that was the start of our second year.
Okay, great. So second year you started where in Africa?
We flew to Cape Town and we did 9 countries in Africa. So we started in Cape Town, of course, did South Africa. And then we went through Lesotho over to Namibia, which was a huge detour to the opposite coastline. But we just had heard such great things about Namibia. And then Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia was all kind of a quick run through, and Malawi, Tanzania, Kenya. So 9 countries. We stopped in Kenya. We really wanted to try to go all through Africa up into Europe. But at this stage in the game, we had already waited a long amount of time for our Russian visas. We didn't want to wait another 9 weeks for a Sudanese visa, for example. Plus, it was a bit sketchy to travel there at that time. So yeah, we stopped in Kenya and again put the bikes on a plane and headed up to Scotland, of all places.
Yeah.
Dave has a great friend there, so we really wanted to see them. That was, Glasgow was one of the options where we could fly the bikes. So we chose Glasgow. And then we went all through Europe pretty quickly. I would say within about a month, maybe 3 weeks after we left Scotland, England, France, Germany, etc. Because by this point, we were nearing the last stage of our travels, and we were so excited and nervous about Russia. So we just kind of blasted through Europe in a matter of weeks just to get to that final, real, what we thought would be a real adventure. So Russia was our last country. However, we popped in and out of it a few times. So we went into Russia, popped down into Kazakhstan, then came back into Russia, and then went down into Mongolia, and then back to Russia again.
Gotcha. Okay, great. And the bike, you had the same bike the whole time? Because you mentioned some issues, or did you get the issues kind of sorted out after the first year and then use the same bike?
Yeah, no. I mean, I don't want to spoiler alert parts of the book, but
Yeah.
I did not stay on the same bike. So I'll just leave it as that. But it was a pretty exciting transition, I will say.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, so Russia, did you do transit visa for Russia or try to get a tourist visa? And where did you get that from?
Yeah, so that was an interesting and very eye-opening experience. So, of course, as a lot of travelers know, you need to be back in your homeland to apply for visas when you have to send your passports in. At least that was the case for this. So we just kind of had this was something that we had to plan for quite a bit in advance, and even having done that, we still kind of screwed up a bit because it was during our first year of travel that we were up in Alaska and whatnot, and we should have started the process while we were heading up into Alaska for the summer, because that could have been working for us in the background. And so, for example, and at least this was, almost 10 years ago now, so things might have changed, but if I'm remembering it all correctly, first thing we needed to acquire was a invitation letter from somebody in Russia that was essentially willing to vouch for us, and also willing to give some of their personal information, like an address and full names and whatnot. And we knew nobody in Russia. So it's like, how do we ask for something like that? And so I started filling out some paperwork, and let's see, this would have been before Christmas. So November of 2016. And I started looking up things online, and I was back home in Canada, which is my citizenship country and where I was born. And I was looking into this whole Russian application, the visa application and whatnot. And, I was like, this is not like any other visa that we have filled out. I mean, for one, a lot of visas can just be gotten at the border crossing. And so I started looking into it, and I thought, okay, the visitor's visa only gave us a month in the country, which wasn't going to be long enough, plus one entry. So if we wanted to go down into Kazakhstan and Russia, how did we get back into Russia? And our whole, trip was ending in Magadan, Russia. So we really wanted to end there, and we wanted to stay in Russia a lot longer than a month, of course. So I called the Russian consulate, I think it was, in Montreal, Canada. And I spoke to this guy. He was so nice and knowledgeable. And I said, hey, look, we want multiple entries into the country, and we need way more than 30 days. Like, is there any way to get around this? And so he said, well, the only other option is a business visa, but you'd have to come in under business pretext. And I thought, well, we can't really do that. How does that work? And so he talked to me a little bit more, and then he said, well, are you conducting any business in Russia? And I thought, well, I certainly don't want to say that, to say something that might, get me in trouble. And I said, no, I am going to write a book about it eventually, but, and he stopped me. He said, okay, so you're a writer, and your travel partner is the photographer. So it sounds like a business to me. And I was like, okay, are you is that going to work? So he's like, yeah, that'll work. Just, write it up on the application form, and, here's where to find that. So anyway, I had wasted about a month of time trying to figure this out and filling out all the wrong application forms. He also, I said, okay, well, what about the invitation letter? And he said, okay, well, you mentioned you're riding motorcycles. There's a motorcycle club in Russia, and maybe they'll be willing to vouch for you. I'll give you their contact info. So I write down an email and I hang up, and I'm so impatient and excited that I just hastily type out this email to the Night Wolves. And, you know, I'm thinking, well, he said they're a nonprofit club. So I was thinking, okay, this is a nonprofit. Like, they're going to be honest people. You know, what could go wrong with a nonprofit? So I type out the email, and then I decide to Google the Night Wolves after I've hit send. And then I get all of this stuff about like motorcycle gangs and like murders and like illegal illicit things, a bunch of stuff with Putin, like Putin's part of the gang. And I'm just like, oh no, like I've just given them like our website or info. It has our tracking information on it, like where, you know, our GPS coordinates. Like I just handed ourselves to this Russian motorcycle gang.
It's like Hell's Angels in Russia.
It's exactly the same. It's Hell's Angels. Exactly. So, and then I found an article that had been written about like the lead member, and his nickname is the Surgeon. It was like so terrifying to read, because it was like, you know, he was like, I hate journalists. I hate, you know, any fascists who are gonna like, you know, exploit. They never say the truth. And I had literally just typed out like, hi, I'm a journalist from Canada because we're trying to get the business visa.
Oh no.
So again, I don't want to spoil what I've written about in the book, but yeah, it was a scary thing to think about, that I just contacted like the Hells Angels of Russia, and they had a lot of they could easily find our personal information. And, you know, so in the long run, I took another route. There's more to that story, but it's in the book. And I ended up contacting BMW Russia, and I spoke to a really nice woman there in marketing, I think, and she vouched for us. She wrote our invitation letters. She just wanted in return for us to do a presentation when we were in Moscow. So I said, well, that's awesome. Like, that's a great trade. We absolutely will do that. So that's how we ended up getting an invitation letter. But this whole process for getting the Russian visas took like until February the following year. So we were home in our countries for well over 3 months. Dave actually went back to work, and I just pined for the trip, because I was really upset to lose so much time from our trip. You know, we had 2 years, but 3 or 4 months of not traveling during that time, you know, it just felt to me like every day we were wasting our time. Of course, it had to happen in order to get visas for what ended up becoming one of the coolest countries that we traveled through. So it was worth it, but a little nail biting for sure.
Was that the most logistically challenging section of that trip, would you say, was getting that visa?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And the only thing I would change is just to do it more in advance. So like if we had at least started the invitation letter process, we could have shaved off about 6 weeks. So that could have been working for us in the background while we were traveling through the Yukon and Alaska. And then we could have come home, and, you know, there still would have been, excuse me, a waiting process, but it would have been cut in half essentially. So yeah, I would say for sure that was tough.
Cool. Okay. I wanted to go backwards a tiny bit. I do want to talk about Russia and your experiences there as well, but I wanted to sort of circle back to this new relationship and traveling with another person that you don't know really that well yet, and what that looked like. And you've mentioned like trust, conflict, and connection as 3 sort of learning points along the way, because you don't know how this person travels or what they're, you know, like I have a husband and I've been with him for a really long time, and I kind of like get what he's like, and nothing's that surprising at this point, knock on wood. But For you, you're going after a month and you don't really know what you're getting into. So I'm curious to know more about how the relationship sort of evolved during that time and with challenges and conflicts and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, we had decided after a month of dating to do this trip, but that was just the decision. Then from that point on, we did everything in our lives to get to that point. So we didn't actually leave after just a month of dating. But we were not living in the same country, and we still had very little time together. A lot of it was just over the phone and weekends here and there. But yeah, like trust, conflict, and connection. I think that is kind of how it happened in order, right? Like we we had to trust each other that, for one, that the other person wasn't going to bail, because we were both making huge sacrifices to do this trip. Now, I say that, but also at the same time, it was perfectly timed for us both. I'd been living in Vancouver for 4 years. I've been running an arts and culture publication for 10. And I personally was ready to be done with it. I was ready to sell my business and just kind of have, like, I was getting kind of itchy feet when I met Dave. And of course, so for him to suggest something like this was just right up my alley, exactly what I was craving at the time. And then Dave had to, he had to sell his house. He is a contractor, a carpenter, so he was able to just kind of just say no to the next job. And for me, I was in a transition between being done with my business and what was next. So as far as jobs and whatnot, that timing worked well. But we had to trust that the other person wasn't just going to get cold feet at the last minute and be like, you know what, I don't think I can do this. And that was probably more likely to happen with me, because I tend to whimsically agree to crazy things like this, and then I worry about it obsessively during the night and talk myself out of it. So there was a lot of sleepless nights where I was like, I don't even know this guy. What if we get kidnapped? What if we get some horrible disease? Like, what if we crash? What if somebody gets hurt or killed? And just the whole ruminate. There's no difference for me worrying about something as opposed to anybody else worrying about something. And on top of it, this new relationship, right? So that's trust really came into it. And also trusting the other person could come up with the money. We just quickly, as a side, we budgeted for $100 a day for both of us, so $50 per person. And that was that's a very modest amount of money to live off of. But some days we'd spend far less, some days far more. But in the grand scheme of things, when you're gone for 708 days, that's well over $70,000. So the way that the math worked is $70,000, you cut that in half, that's 35 per person that we'd have to come up with to do this 2 years of travel. Well, you cut that again in half, and that's, 18.5 a year. Most of us will spend $18,000 just on stuff throughout a year. So it started to kind of, sure, we had to have that money at first. We didn't want to be putting this on credit cards or anything. And that's another thing, is trusting how the person works with their money, and could they save up for that. I had just recently sold a house in Revelstoke. It wasn't quite the lucrative deal that it would be these days with that resort town, but I had made a profit off the house, and I had just squirreled it away into RRSPs and trying to be responsible until Dave came along. So I did have a little bit of money that I didn't have to worry about trying to figure it out. I just had to worry if I wanted to take out my investments, if I felt that was the right thing to do. And as I mentioned, Dave ended up selling his house, which was really hard for him because he had remodeled it and put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. But he realized that he didn't really want to have, neither of us wanted ties back home that could distract us from being in the moment of the trip. So it was a tough choice. And honestly, if we had left a year later, like we were originally planning, trying to get back into the housing market where he lived in Bellingham, Washington, would have probably been impossible for us after traveling for 2 years and coming home broke. So we had that going for us. We didn't, for one, we didn't load up the credit cards with a debt that we'd have to pay off when we came back. And two, we left a year earlier than planned. So as you can imagine, after only knowing each other a month, we thought it would be the good thing to do would be to spend more time together and get a lot of things more organized. But in the end, we said, no, let's go now. You never know what's going to happen in a year. I always joke that Dave was worried that I was going to break up with him in that time and then the trip would be over. But, it's really one of those things where it's like, if not now, when? Which I think is the chapter of that part of the book. So then, after all of that, and then you realize like, holy crap, this person is like committed just like I am. That's a really good feeling to help you move forward from there. The conflict part comes next because, just starting a new relationship with anybody in your home life is tricky, right? And especially when you're our age, which we were in our 40s, right? So we were both very set in our ways about things, and that we both have very strong personalities. We're both very stubborn and independent and determined, and nobody really acquiesces very well between us. So it's all fun and games, and it's the whole honeymoon phase at first. And then you get on the trip and you realize that this person's feet smell so bad, or that or that this person gets angry like too quickly about something that you think is silly, or you yourself are just going through this whole evolution and formation of just world travel, which changes everybody in a certain way. And so it's inevitable that conflict will come up. So you're saying, you've known your husband for a long time and you know how he is in his ways. I didn't have any history to go on. So I'd see Dave react to something and I'd be like, what the hell? Like, why is he so upset? Conversely, same for him. He would watch me ride over some really tricky terrain the day before, and I'd be super confident, I'd get over it. And then the next day would be something that he felt was less scary or less treacherous. And I'd stop dead in my tracks and ask him to ride my bike through it. And so I was constantly vacillating with my one day feeling like Wonder Woman, the next feeling like a wimp. And that caused a lot of tension too, because it's, for both of us, I mean, I'm thinking, I'm trying to, I should be advancing as a rider as I'm going along here. And some days I just felt like I was regressing and going backwards. So, and sometimes it's just like you get to like a river crossing or something and Dave would just blast right through it. And I'd have this vision of me like dying. I'm like, I can't go through that. I'm going to die. And I wouldn't, of course, but I just would have this irrational fear. The next day I would ride up something steep and rocky and with no problem. So things like that, we were learning about each other and kind of had to go along with it. The great thing about having two bikes and different helmets and headsets that can turn off is you just can stay in your own little bubble and you can be mad at the person for the entire day. Whereas overland travel in a 4x4 truck or something, you're beside each other all day and the awkward silence, right? So some days we'd wake up and somebody would forget to, take the tent down the right way or whatever, and we'd be livid with each other. But you get on your bike and you just ride for a few hours and then you stop for lunch and everything feels better because you've just gone. That actually happened to us in Guatemala City, and I just kept going. And then we had headsets, but they wouldn't work very well sometimes. And so, I could hear like some static and then this like, oh, and then we would be separated from each other. So, that happened in Guatemala City. It happened in Poland. And, Also in Cusco, I got really separated from our entire group of riders we were riding with that day. And I think these little things happened just to remind me that I can handle myself. In no case, none of those cases did I panic or be like, oh my God, I'm in a country, I don't even know anybody. I just got separated from my riding partner who has the GPS, who knows our route. And now I'm completely like solo. And I almost welcomed those little things that would happen in the day where I was forced to think for myself. So in all of those cases, I just thought, okay, pull off. I could send him a message, tell him where I am. He knows with our inReaches, we had the last coordinates. So if I sent him a message, it would give him my coordinates and he could find me if I just stayed there. So that was one tactic we used. Another tactic was that our inReach has an online account. And when I got separated from him in Poland, I just found some Wi-Fi and I logged into our account and I could see where he was on the map. And he was, quite a ways ahead of me. And my first thought was, that, like, why is he so far ahead of me? But when I finally caught up to him, he was stopped in a parking lot and he was so worried, right? And when I caught up, I was like, well, this is what happens when we're riding, so far apart. And he said, well, I thought you had pulled off. So I sat and waited for a bit to see if you just pulled off to pee or something. And then, I waited and waited. And then I thought, well, should I go back? And, it was a big freeway. You couldn't really turn around. So in the end, we always found each other. There were, it's, you're gonna find the way. I mean, I knew in that case in Poland that we were going to the Ukraine border. So the worst case scenario was 375 miles to the border. I would find him there at some point.
Yeah.
So that was, the riding style, the fact that my whole reason for riding a motorcycle around the world and using that form of transportation was to have that convenience and that independence of having my own transportation. Dave's was to literally ride a motorcycle. He didn't care where it was, the harder the better, right? So we had differing views on, we were both riding bikes, but we had different reasons. I was using the bike to get me through some beautiful countries and not be waiting for 6 hours for the next chicken bus to leave, right? So I loved having the independence of my own vehicle. The motorcycle itself did scare me a lot more than it scared Dave. And he was a much more adept rider, even though I learned how to ride a year before he did. But so that was kind of some of our conflict. Another little side bit of conflict was that I love taking photos. I mean, as a writer, I just know it's ingrained in me that you cannot pitch a story to a magazine without exceptional photography, as you well know as well. So, I would see these gorgeous scenes on the side of the road or something I wanted to film and stop. And, Dave was wanting to just, get out of the heat, or we were tired. We just wanted to get off the road before dark. So we would sometimes have arguments about like, I'm taking too many photos. But through all of this, the trust and the conflict inevitably builds connection. And you don't necessarily know it's happening at the time, but it's kind of an inevitable fallout for two people who love each other. You just, again, in the moment, sometimes it just feels like everything's going wrong. But there was this love between us. And then there was also this really intense determination to make it to the end of this trip, which is Magadan in Russia. And sometimes that, I would be having these feelings of like, are we ever going to get there? Like, are we going to survive, for one? And are we going to get there together? Like there were some arguments where we really reassessed, like, is this worth the stress that it's causing us? Are we just blindly aiming for this arbitrary end to things? And in the meanwhile, are we enjoying ourselves? Like, if we're not enjoying ourselves, like, should we be pushing so hard. So when you read the book, there's a lot of moments where I think the reader will be like, why did they keep going? Like, how, this doesn't even sound like they're having fun. And again, this wasn't intended to be a negative, storytelling. It was to really show the human perseverance and the suffering that comes with just really wanting to achieve a huge goal. And I don't know anybody who sets out to achieve something huge in their life who does not struggle either within themselves or with the outside world. Always, you're always kind of battling something, and that's what makes the goal worth it. So we connected in the sense that we were, we felt the same things. We felt when there was a freezing cold day that's driving rain down the back of your neck. Doesn't matter, how much windproof or waterproof gear you're wearing. We would both be feeling the heat intensely. We'd have headaches. We'd both be feeling the ground as we're sleeping in the tent, wishing we had a hotel that night. So all of these day-to-day things connected us and formed a bond that even when we were super angry or annoyed with each other, it's what brings you to that next point the next day. And really all it comes down to is you get on your bike, you point your wheels down the road, and you don't have to think much beyond that, which is a really freeing feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like make or break in a way, yes, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, and you'll have to read the book to find out what happens.
Yes. Yeah, that's, I do these presentations for places like Horizons Unlimited and Overland Expo, and there's inevitably somebody in the crowd who's like, yeah, but what happened to the guy? Like, did you guys stay together? And I always say, like, I'm not going to tell you. You have to buy the book and find out what happened next.
Yeah, what's the end to the love story? I'll have to
Exactly.
find out. I wanted to ask you also about like the unfiltered side of long-term adventure travel. And I think with the popularity of Instagram and Facebook, and we see so many sort of polished, beautiful experiences and photos, and a lot of travel content it looks very idealistic and perfect and wonderful, but it's not capturing necessarily all the time the other side of it. Yeah, what were the realities on the road? What were experiences that you had that you were like, this is really hard, or I'm scared, or this is not what I expected. This is not what Instagram is showing me overlanding supposed to be, or motorcycle travel is supposed to be. Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how personal you want to get, but I do talks with all female crowds and we get very personal. I usually let somebody in the crowd bring it to, the female hygiene thing before I jump into it. But I will say, being a woman on the road when you don't have access to daily showers and you have internal plumbing in your body and you're just, like you're exposed to so much more. It's really, you have to let go of a lot of that. If you're really hung up on having a shower every day, you're going to be miserable. I took care of matters with, wet wipes and tea tree oil and water in a water bottle. And, your body gets used to it, right? Your body starts to realize, like, okay, we're not showering every day. My hair looks like hell. You're talking about like Instagram photos. I mean, all of these people look gorgeous and poised and, but they're out in these rugged landscapes. And I have a photo that is probably me at my absolute ugliest. And it was after, almost 2 years of riding 2,000 miles of gravel to Magadan, and the dust that just completely covers your face and everything, like I look goth, but not in a cool way. And I actually look more like a 90-year-old miner down in the coal mines. Like, everything is wrong with that photo, but it also, I just love looking at it every now and again because it's like, wow, that is truly what travel is. I mean, you're covered in dust, you don't look good. I mean, my skincare routine just went down the toilet. I didn't even wash my face sometimes for 3 or 5 days. I never even brought moisturizer. I was using coconut oil when I would remember. And I was lucky if I splashed water over my face at night. I had crap in my teeth. I had, my eyes just like were sunken because I was so tired all the time. And there's no glamour to it. And except for moments like this when you get to sit down and be interviewed. Like the day-to-day of it is like, it's gross, it's smelly, it's dirty. Like I talked earlier about, someone's feet stinking, and it wasn't mine. Body stinks after a few days, right? But again, that just makes when you do, splurge on that hotel with air conditioning and that shower with hot water, just an absolute luxury. And those things, you don't think about them so much when you're at home every day and you come home from work and you have a shower. I mean, we all love a hot shower, but we take them for granted. So there's that side of things. I developed a bladder infection. It was horribly painful, especially while riding a motorcycle. And how do you get that taken care of? When you're in a country that has, like, I just went to the pharmacy and used my translation app to ask for medication. And that actually worked. But sometimes you would need a doctor. How do you even begin to do that? So, and then, I was in pain a lot. I mean, it was always uncomfortable. Like you're, riding a motorcycle for a long period of time over really hard terrain. And although we had a lot of time, we still had to get places by the end of the day, right? You need to get somewhere where it's legal or nice to camp. And quite often we were pushing the limits on that. So, you're like, I always had this pain in my shoulders. I'd be too hot or too cold. And, so it's not all of these lovely, sunny or incredible photos that people, show online. That said, I have an Instagram account. I have some gorgeous photos on there. There are moments in every day that are absolutely stunning and shocking. Otherwise, why do this, right?
Yes.
So the book that I wrote, Riding Full Circle, is very true, I think, to what long-term, long-distance travel is without trying to make us look good. I mean, there are points in that book where we both look like jerks. We both look insecure. I think that's really important because who in 2 years of their life doesn't experience ups and downs and stresses and forks in the road? I mean, it's not like you go away for 2 years and all of that, disappears from your life and you're just on holiday. There's no holiday about this. It's travel, and travel is not a holiday.
Yes, that's a good point. It was funny when you were describing having that hot shower after a while, and I was just remembering, like the color of the water is so shocking at the bottom of the shower, and you're like, holy, and I can smell like the dust, like from my hair. When the water hits your hair, you like smell the smell of dust as it's like streaming out. It's like incredible. And then you're like, how many times do I have to wash this hair to get the water color to be normal? Yeah, that shower is great.
You're in a hotel. Almost every hotel in the world has white towels. You'll stay in that shower for an hour and you come out and there's still grime all over the towel somehow, right?
These white towels, it's so funny. Yeah, good times. I wanted to ask you a little bit about traveling as a woman in the global moto world, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but Do you feel like you were told you can't do that, or it's too dangerous where you're going, or you don't have enough experience, or, you're not an expert enough to do a big trip like that? How were you responded to as you continued across the world?
Yeah, I love talking about this subject because there, as we know, or maybe some listeners don't know, there are many female motorcycle travelers out there in the world right now. When I first started this trip, which was 10 years ago, there was hardly any clothing. There wasn't very much protective clothing for a female. It was really hard for me to find a bike. Like, I'm fairly short. I'm like 5'5". And I have pretty short legs. So just trying to find the vessel that I needed to achieve this trip was tricky. I mean, I always had to look for something with a lowered seat and lowered suspension, which, as motorcycle folks know, that compromises the ride somewhat too, and your clearance and all that. So um, finding the bike was hard. Finding gear that didn't make me look like a popsicle, or like a, shrink it and pink it technique that drives me crazy. It's like, we're just going to take this, black t-shirt that's a size large man's and shrink it and turn it into pink. Like, we don't want that. I wanted something stylish. Like, for 2 years, you kind of want to, and you're going to see yourself in photos, and then you're going to maybe sell those photos. Like, you don't want to look like a dork.
Also, why
So
pink? Why is this why though? Like a lot
black and
of,
pink. Well, because
yeah.
it's gotten so much better. I mean, there are some incredible brands out there. I see Climb ads in my Facebook feed, and they have really nice colored jackets and stuff for female, like, snowmobilers and riders and stuff. And Revit was my go-to brand that I used on the trip. They, were kind of cutting into that industry for female riders back then. So those were difficult at first, was just trying to find the right gear and stuff that just didn't feel like it was all made to fit for a man or a small man. Um, and and then, as far as how I was perceived while traveling, almost everywhere, people loved seeing a female riding her own bike, no matter the country. I mean, I would get so many thumbs up. I would get people like turning around on freeways to come up to me and like roll down the window and give me a high five. I love this one story of, I was on a back road in Peru, and this big, you can probably envision these big farm trucks where everybody stands up in the back, right? And it was full of women, and they were old women. And my first thought, of course, was how uncomfortable for these poor old ladies, but also they were staring at me like with this stern expression, and I thought, oh my God, they think I'm crazy, or that I'm being irresponsible or reckless. And all of a sudden, they all just broke out in smiles and started clapping as I went by. And that was, I mean, it was just awesome. It was all these old ladies, and they were so excited. And my hair is fairly long, so I always had it kind of outside of my helmet, and a lot of people wouldn't know I was female until I rode past, right? So there were great experiences. Now, having said that, when you do a trip like this and you have a social media feed and you're putting yourself out there online with a website and whatnot, you're inevitably going to get, the guy that wants to tell you that you are too delicate to do something like this. And they just can't help themselves. They just have to tell you that you can't ride a big bike. There was a man that had said, that bike is way too big for you. You're going to kill yourself on it. I showed up in Moscow, and a man came over to me and asked if that was my bike. And I said, yes. And he said, oh, it's too big for you. And I said, well, I got here from Canada like a year and a half ago, so I guess it's not too big for me. And then there was an incident in Mongolia at the border where I write about this in the book. It was really disturbing. I was like harassed physically by a man who shoved me and spit on me or on my windshield because I could only surmise it was because he didn't like seeing me with four men because I was traveling with another bunch of guys at that time. A single woman with four men and riding her own bike. There was something emasculating to him, I guess, about that. So he harassed me at the border, and luckily I was able to get rid of him and just take off. That was a bizarre thing, but for the most part, I would say men, women, young, old, especially young girls, just lose their minds when they see a female on a bike, especially a big bike. They just love it. And it's just one of those things that made my day. You're riding along and you're grumpy. Maybe you've had a fight with your travel partner and you're feeling like this isn't the time of my life I thought I was having, and then somebody comes by and rolls down their window and just gives you a thumbs up, and it just makes your day. Yeah, now again, I had a very different experience riding with a male partner, and I felt very safe, even on the times when we got separated, or if I went out on my own, walking through cities or towns or whatever to get groceries. Like, I just always had this sense of security because I was with somebody. Previous to this trip, I've done a lot of countries solo backpacking, including places like Africa, which can be quite intimidating for a female. And there was a lot of times I didn't feel safe and I felt scared. So I had that advantage traveling with Dave, and just being a couple, I think, really softens a lot of situations as well.
Yeah. Yep. Especially country. Yeah. Yeah. There are, men and women that travel together that aren't married. And I think sometimes get questions like, well, are you married? Or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you guys, you're together, but are you married or,
Yeah. And it never hurts to wear a fake wedding ring. I think it's just one less thing to worry about, something that's not too glitzy, of course, so you're not going to get robbed for it, but just something that you do have to be respectful and conscientious of cultures. And you can inadvertently do things that upset or are very disrespectful, right? And so if you have, if you have these little ways that you can just soften the blow, I mean, it can be very disturbing in lots of cultures for women to see other women with so much freedom. So, that's something to take into consideration. If you're going to ride your own bike through some of these countries, then maybe at least dress the way that they, aren't going to be, they're not going to be upset with or feel intimidated by when you're off bike, right? Just do the customs when you're off bike. Yeah. I mean,
take a look around, assess the situation. Yeah, I think
and that's
good.
Yes, it huge. I mean, don't just blow through, stop and say hi to the kids. Quite often when we slowed down and went through villages in like, South America, in Africa, we would, you'd lift your visor up and just smile and wave, go slow, don't blast through and stir up a bunch of dust. We traveled with a couple of guys for a bit through Peru, and their bikes were so obnoxiously loud, and they just always seemed to be kind of tearing things up. And they were a blast to hang out with. But I always kind of thought, oh, it's a bit disrespectful, like coming into a small quiet village with a really loud dirt bike or whatever. Just little things like that to just make it easier, because you arrive in these places looking like an astronaut. You can terrify people. Like, in some cases they might think you're military or part of some SWAT team or FBI or something. I mean, it's, the whole get up can be scary. So whatever you can do to soften that, I think is important.
Yeah, wise words for sure. And also that time spent just stopping for a second is very educating because you can see what the local women are wearing, to your point earlier. And you don't, I'm not saying you dress like them, but you can see kind of what people are wearing in different regions, and that dictates, for me anyways, I'm not speaking for anybody else, but that dictates kind of like what I feel comfortable wearing.
Yeah.
Like in terms of looseness or tightness of clothing or material or what's covered, stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, everybody's different, but to your point there, continuing with this unfiltered realities of long-term travel, I think one of those things we talked a little bit about, some of like I don't want to say like negative things, but the real moments, and not everything's looking perfect and things like that. But the kindness of strangers is a really wonderful reality of longer term travel and short term travel. And I wanted to come back to Russia a little bit and was wondering if you have any kindness of strangers stories from that country.
Just you even saying that, I'm getting shivers because I don't even know where to start. One of the coolest things I think about Russia was that everybody warned us that it would be, hostile, that we'd have to be watching our backs a lot, that we might get into trouble with the law, or like, just that people would not be kind. And it started the very day that we entered Russia for the first time. And the border guard was just, I mean, he was very stern and intimidating. And then, but once he, saw our Canadian passports, because Dave is a dual citizen and I'm Canadian, and recently an American. So now I'm a dual citizen as well, which is very exciting. But once they saw our Canadian passports, it was like smiles and questions like, do you do a lot of travel? That's very good, and welcome to our country. That was like the day we entered. And so that set the tone for the rest of our time in Russia, which was about 3 months. It was such a lesson in how people can be so resourceful. And you don't have to be over the top kind and sweet. I mean, that gets exhausting after a while for a traveler, to be honest. I mean, all of us travelers out there know of a time when all you want to do is stop for the day and be by yourself, and just have a quiet time and just read a book and maybe eat some potato chips for dinner. But that's always the time you get invited by some like village mama who wants to have 15 people over because you're such a novelty and you have to be on. That is it's so exhausting, right? So it's really the Russians are not over the top friendly, and that is totally fine because they're still so friendly, and they'll keep their distance, but if you need them for something or you want to ask them something, they're there. There's starting with the border crossing, and then of course we had this amazing friend named Al. She and I had been in contact through Facebook, like BMW Russia, and she helped us huge with logistics for getting into Moscow and beyond. She even went so far as to reserve us a hotel for 2 nights that she paid for out of her own pocket and refused to let us pay her back, because she just said, I wanted you to feel safe and welcome in my city. So I think she was like 19 years old when we met her. She was so young, but so wise and independent. She was an eye-opener for me, because without travel, you have absolute ignorance and of a culture, and you just make assumptions based off what you hear in the news or what you might read about and whatnot. And I had assumed that Russian women would be very docile and subservient because of what the culture has taught me in the past, or what the news has taught me about the culture. And she was just this little firecracker that just took everything under control and had all of these big men just like stopping and listening to her. And she just took control, and she was wonderful. And from there, as we headed east toward Magadan, there's hardly anything. I mean, there's a couple of cities like Yakut and Irkut. She was so worried for our safety. She was like a mother hen. But next thing I can kind of remember about another example of kindness of strangers is we were at the very last stages of our trip, and things were just getting so exhausting. And it was kind of at that point where I was very desensitized by almost everything. I mean, I still loved a beautiful sunny day and the scenery, but I was road weary. And I hit some gravel patch and had a very bad crash. I was not hurt, thankfully, due to good gear, but I could have been hurt really badly, gone off the edge of the road, which would have sent me down to probably my death. And my bike was really trashed, and the brake reservoir broke. So I had no more front brakes, and just everything, the whole instrument cluster was a mess. And, limped it into Yakuts. And we had some really we'd been traveling with these guys, the Latvians, called them they were called Adventure Team Latvia. And these guys were just awesome. They had gone ahead and they had figured out, they didn't know I had crashed, but they had, they were always helping and like helping us secure hotels and whatnot. And, I had arrived at this party that they were at with my bike, and the guy that knew English, he knew English and Russian and whatnot, and he looked at my bike and he was like, what the hell happened? And I said, well, like, I crashed and I just want to go to bed right now, I'm so tired. So he enlisted this guy to help us find a hotel room. And again, he's not from Russia, he's Latvian. But what comes next is this series of people that just comes out of the woodwork, comes to where I'm staying at the hotel. And, somebody just shows up and says, I can help you find a new brake reservoir. We can figure out how to get you brakes on your bike again. Like, I don't even know what these people do every day, but don't they have jobs? I mean, this guy's just out of his own time comes to help me fix my bike and finds like a Chinese knockoff part and helps me put my bike back together. Never knew him before and haven't seen him since, but spent an entire day helping me put my bike back together. So, and also just the ingenuity of figuring out in these little towns. I mean, Yakuts is a big city, but just where to find something and like what you can get by with. Dropping everything to help a stranded traveler. I mean, I can't say enough about that because it happened all of the time. And you would be having the worst day of your life. My bike broke down and we couldn't figure out how to repair it, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd both be in the worst moods. Like maybe we were looking forward to getting to a certain spot and now we can't because something's broken down or happened. And all of a sudden out of the woods would come, your savior who's going to make you smile and laugh and invite you to their house for water and a shower or whatever. It never failed. And this is something that I do not see in my day-to-day life here. There's something about travel, and it's like you get these guardian angels, that come with your flight ticket or whatever. I mean, they just are there. And in the most, bizarre circumstances that just come out of nowhere. And I really can't finish this interview without talking about our friends Neil and Linda, who again, this is something that set the precedent for the kindness of strangers right at the very start of the trip. It's not really a secret that I had a crash at the beginning of my trip too that actually broke a bone. And I've written about it and whatnot. It's out there, so I can disclose that. But Neil had met us in a gas station parking lot, and we were just sitting there eating ice cream, having a little break. And Neil came over and asked what we're doing, because of course the bikes always draw attention. And
where was
he,
this?
you know,
Sorry.
This was in near Sandpoint, Idaho. So this was like
great.
2 weeks after we had left. So right at the very start of our travel. And anyway, Neil talked to us for a bit. He got our website. 3 days later, I had my crash and I was nursing a broken bone. And he read on our blog that this was the case. He doesn't even know us. He sends me an email right away and says, I'm going to come get you. I've got a truck. We can put your motorcycle in the back of it, and you're going to stay at my ranch for as long as you need.
Wow.
And we did. We rode 2 up. We didn't make him drive to get us because it was 100 miles in one direction. But, him and his wife just put us up for almost 2 weeks. They loaned us their vehicles, and these aren't just any vehicles. These are like, classic cars, like a classic truck in one case, paid for everything, completely stocked the cabin that we were staying in on their property with food for us, and would not ask for anything. And they just gave us that space for me to heal. And I just can't say enough about how, like, what kind of faith and trust I had in humans after that. And Americans, like growing up in Canada, you hear things about Americans, and we're all, again, the product of what we hear on the news. So, this is an Idahoan gentleman who just took pity on this young couple, youngish couple, who were kind of stranded, and opened up his house, gave us the code to his front door, and left for 3 days with strangers in his home. That kind of trust in humans and strangers that you don't even know is another thing that you just don't see in your day-to-day life. And so traveling, to me, is the only thing that is, I think, mandatory in one's life. You just have to do it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to be able to have these experiences with people. It's a wonderful, wonderful part of travel that I'm grateful for. But thank you so much for sharing your kindness of strangers story with us, Heather. That, I guess I'll wrap it up. And yeah, thank you again for joining me on the podcast, and congratulations on your book. And I'm so excited to read it. I'm wondering where we can find you online and the best place to find your book.
Yeah, you can get the book anywhere books are sold online. If I'm being honest, it's a little bit more of a positive interaction for me if you purchase it directly off my website. Within the US anyway, that's fairly easy to do. International sales, I would suggest just going and finding the book online. I'm not going to play any favorites, but of course the usual suspects like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. But yeah, if you go to Heather Lea Writer, the book is available there. That's the best place to go. And then of course you get to see some travel photos and whatnot too, which is always fun. Yeah. But yeah, thank you. I had a blast. This trip happened a long time ago, but it's still such a huge part of my life and really has shaped my life moving forward. So I love talking about it, and I really appreciate this opportunity you guys gave. Thank you.
Of course, it's been such a pleasure. Yeah, I'm sure we can find you on Instagram and
yes,
all the rest, like
Heather
you said.
Lea Writer.
So, perfect. That's great. Thank you again. And also thank you so much to the Overland Journal podcast listeners for tuning into this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And we will see you next time. Thanks.
Bye.